Okay, so we are live. Good evening, everybody. Good evening, Caleb and Vanessa. Welcome to the Bristol Festival of Ideas online. I'm really pleased to this evening be hosting a conversation with the second city poet of Bristol, Vanessa Kisuule, and the, as of today, I think it was about 2.5 hours ago, third city poet of Bristol, Caleb Parkin. My name is Madhu Krishnan. I'm a professor at the University of Bristol. I was part of the selection panel that chose Caleb, so it's super exciting to be here. Before we begin, I did want to inform our audience that the Festival of Ideas Autumn program has moved online this year for obvious reasons, but will still feature writers and thinkers from all over the world. You can sign up to our e-newsletter via our website, and you can follow us on Twitter. We also have a Facebook page, so you can stay up to date with the latest events that we add. This event will be available to watch again via Crowdcast, and it'll also be on our YouTube channel if you want to check it out again. Um, just to let you know, the format tonight is going to be fairly informal. We did do a live handover that was graciously hosted by the Mayor of Bristol, Marvin Rees, earlier today at the Bristol Old Vic, but we wanted to do something that would be more accessible to a wider audience. So it's going to be about 40 minutes long. We will have some conversation. I've heard a rumor that Caleb is going to read us his first official poem as Bristol City Poet at the end. So it's going to be something that'll hopefully be really inclusive. Please do feel free to use the chat function, which you should see at the bottom of your screen to say hello, to talk to other audience members. You can also see at the bottom of your screen a tab that says Ask a Question, and you can use that to submit a question as it suggests. You can also vote, I believe, on the kind of questions that you want to see. You can vote up your favorites, these sorts of things. So please do feel free to use all of the interactive elements that being online lets us do, and hopefully we'll have a great chat. So I just wanted to start by asking each of you guys to kind of introduce yourself to everybody or tell us a bit about yourselves as a poet. I mean, maybe Vanessa, we can start with you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
I'm Vanessa Kisuule, former Bristol City Poet. I held the post from 2018 to today. And I guess what is there to say? I am still writing and performing and finding ways to maintain that through these unprecedented times. I'm the first person to ever put those words in that order. And yeah, it's more or less holding itself together. As scary as it is to be an artist right now, and try to be an artist who makes a living from it. I'm trying to hold my nerve and remember that artists have sustained and created through times as scary and as unknowable as this throughout history. So I'm standing on the legacy of the artists before me that were also sad, scared, and confused, but held their pens and their paintbrushes anyway and soldiered on. So that's me, everyone.
Great. And what about you, Caleb?
Can you?
Yes.
Yes. There's a funny thing
You're
going on with
sounding a
the
little
icon on the
bit
screen.
submarine-y, but it's okay.
Okay. I hope that's not these headphones. Is this okay? You can hear me? Yeah.
Yeah, it's fine. It's
All right.
fine.
Great. Yeah. My name's Caleb Parkin. I hadn't realised it was the kind of official bestowing moment earlier. Like there's a moment when I wasn't, and then a moment when I was. So thank you. So I'm the incoming, the new Bristol City Poet for the next couple of years. I'm a poet, performer, facilitator and tutor, do a lot of writing for wellbeing work, and I'm very interested in eco-poetry and poetry film and various other things. Got quite broad interests. And I think, as you brought it up, Vanessa, I've been adapting a lot, and this process has been interesting because it's all been done through this medium and we're all learning it. And finding ways to be creative and collaborate and to do stuff even though we're having to change it all as we go and dance with the situation as I like to think of it. But yeah, it's a great pleasure to be starting as City Poet.
Great. Well, it's really great again to be in conversation with you guys. And I guess I wanted to start by asking each of you if you could maybe reflect a little bit on your own journeys as poets, which has led you to taking on this role, which is it's a literary role, but it's also a civic role, and just kind of how did you get here? What's your process been like? What's it been like?
Hmm. Do you want to go, Caleb, or?
No, it's fine. You go for it.
Um, I think when you're lucky enough to live in a city or a town, even that has the opportunity to be the poet or the bard of that place, it's a really rare opportunity to bring poetry into a sphere of potential influence of broad reach. I think so often poetry is the preserve of academia, of particular literary circles, and that's all well and good. But it's really nice when a government or a civic body acknowledges that poetry has something to offer to a general population, and there being a specific role that is created and funded really speaks to the fact that we live in a time, and I suppose there's always been bards and laureates and things, but we're living in a time because I feel like there's a resurgence of these roles. You've got the young poet laureate of London. There's a poet of Birmingham, I believe. There's a bard of Bath. I feel like there's been a resurgence of these titles because there's an understanding that poetry is speaking to us in a way that nothing else can, and I'm really loving the fact that there's something that you can aim for as a poet. It's something that you can say to yourself, hopefully I can get to a point in my writing, in my career, where someone would entrust this role, this money, this platform to me, and that I might actually be able to offer something to people other than poetry fans who would already bring themselves to a reading, or people who are in literature courses and degrees, but to be able to bring yourself out to a wider audience and offer poetry as a legitimate and exciting art form for the masses is a really unique opportunity.
Yeah, what about you, Caleb?
So I guess I was thinking then, I applied 2 years ago as well, but I just wasn't in the right place actually, and I hadn't got to where I feel like, I am now and taking it on now. And that's great. Like we talked a bit earlier as well about talking to your kind of younger self and those kinds of things. But actually, it's an amazing amount can happen as we now know, of course, in like a couple of years as well. And I feel like um, for me, poetry's always been this space of really finding out who you are, really kind of going with your interests and your passions, and then celebrating those through the work you make, both in terms of writing and in terms of who you work with. A lot of my work is working with groups, and as I said earlier as well, I really see poetry as this ecology. And it's not just of poets and not just of people within literature. It's for everybody and can be exciting for everybody. And I like this idea of a civic. I was looking this up a bit actually after I was appointed, and kind of this idea of a civic poet, or what that kind of means. What your role is there to kind of encourage people to take part or join in, maybe. So that for me is what it's about. I think as a city poet, join in.
And I mean, for each of you guys, was there a specific moment or encounter or time in your life when poetry suddenly became the thing for you?
I'll start on that one just because I guess it's always been with me. Like, and I think most poets, you develop as a poet, but also there's a degree to which sometimes when I'm working with young people, I'll be like, poet, I spot them and I'll be like, well, you need to keep writing. And then for other people, it doesn't feel quite so intuitive. And then you have to nurture and develop that. And of course, there are loads of life circumstances that mean it can take a while. And so for me, that was kind of I started at secondary, like GCSE level. My English teacher at the time said we could create a book of poems as our project. It was just brilliant, the freedom of that. So I made this plastic wallet, thing full of poems, and really had a sense of, wow, this is a space I can put my experience of the world and process everything and be imaginative and playful. So that was a really big moment, and I wrote ever since. But it's only since I was 29, 30, and 37 now that I was like, okay, I need to put all of these other experiences I've got in the service of poetry and vice versa or whatever, so it's always been with me. But I feel like as a career, the last 7 years I've been like, right, crack on. But it takes a while, you have to be around in poetry and you have to stick with it. And
yeah.
Mm.
I don't think my connection with poetry was as immediate. I always loved books from a very young age, but I don't remember particularly loving poetry until I reached about 18, and there was a cake and poetry club at my school, and I went for the cake and then ended up quite liking some of the poems. But that felt more sort of residual than anything else. And it was very much literary poetry. But I remember falling in love with Simon Armitage's work and Yehuda Amichai. And there was a little moment of, oh, this is pretty cool. But I didn't think I want to write this stuff. I just enjoyed some of the poems. And then when I was in Uganda, where my family are from, I met a cousin who was really into spoken word. And he described it to me. And I remember thinking, that sounds whack. That sounds pretentious as hell. I was not interested at all. And then he showed me some videos on YouTube. And, every now and then in your life, it doesn't happen super frequently, but you have such a clear sense of, I've arrived at something. And it's a bodily feeling. It's not in the head. There's something that clicks in here, right? And I just I was consumed. I would just watch them I would just sit in front of YouTube for the whole day and watch poem after poem after poem. Poems that I look back on now and I'm like, these poems are rubbish. They were like everything that we get mocked for within the spoken word community. Like, every trope you could think of, it was there. But at the time, I thought it was incredible. And, I still have a lot of love for those poems for being my access point. But yeah, from there, I went to an open mic and then some slams, and it snowballed from there. But I wasn't one of those kids that was loving T.S. Eliot from the age of 14. That was definitely not me. I loved novels.
I think about that.
I loved every other iteration of storytelling, but poetry didn't really resonate until my late teens.
And actually, that brings up something that I was wondering about when we were talking earlier, Vanessa, because you are a performance poet as well, and you've been in the slam scene, and you've done really well in the slam scene. But then today we saw your beautiful anthology that was produced with all of the poems that you wrote for your Bristol City Poet commissions over the last 2 years. And I was wondering, about that relationship for you between performing your poetry and your poetry on the page.
It's a fraught relationship. I think as I've studied poetry more and begun to really appreciate the merits of poetry that is, I don't like the idea of poetry being written for page and poetry being written for stage, because obviously there's lots of poets that bridge both of those things beautifully. I believe that poetry is first and foremost an oral tradition. I think poetry is always meant to be heard before it's meant to be read silently on a page. But certainly there are a lot of writers that come to the craft of writing on the page in a very particular way. And if they ever do read the work, it's because that's a requisite of being a poet who wants to sell books. You have to go and do your reading, but they don't necessarily consider that an integral part of their process. And the more I read poetry, from, Faber poets and Blood Axe poets and get really into, this kind of geeky craft stuff, the more I see elements of that I really admire and want to incorporate into my work. And, just getting into some of the more abstract and strange and surreal ways that you can play with language and push it a little bit more. It's really hard to go into that new world whilst also embracing what I've learned from spoken word, and not lose the immediacy, not lose the colloquialism, because those are things that make me who I am and have given me the fans and admirers of my work that I have. So I don't want to suddenly become someone who's speaking in what I believe to be, these abstruse riddles. That's not the type of person I am. I always want to feel that even if I'm writing something that might be rigorous or complex, that I'm not trying to speak over people's heads. And I don't think any poet ever does that intentionally, if I'm being, generous. But it's been difficult because when I published my first book, it was this sinking realization that, oh, these poems that bang on stage, they wilt on the page. What are we going to do about that? And oftentimes it ended up being a case that the version in the book was quite a different thing to what I would do on the stage. I want to get to a place where what I write on the page stands up by itself, and it can also come to life on the stage. And people do that, like your Darnell Smiths, your Caroline Birds. There are poets who, you know, on the page, on the stage, just smashing it. But it's a very particular skill to be able to command both of those worlds. And I'm getting there, but it's been quite the teething process. Yeah.
It's interesting to me that you refer to this as like this new world that you're navigating, because you did study literature, right? Like in my own department.
Yeah. No, that is a good point. But I guess it's probably not good for me to compartmentalize myself in this way, but I consider that academic endeavor of studying English literature quite different to being a writer and a performer and a fan. They're actually quite different things. They engage different parts of my brain entirely. And I actually had to completely dissociate from all of the things I learned in my English literature degree to enjoy books again, because books became associated with all of these things. To the point where picking up a book for leisure just was so laden with all this stuff that I'd learned in those 3 years. So I've stripped a lot of it away. And then I've been able to re-engage with literature that might be considered highbrow on my own terms, and not, have I got this correct? Have I successfully understood or got this poem? And this is what you'll hear again and again when you work with young people and kids when it comes to poetry. Yeah, I don't know if I get it. And I tell them all the time, I don't give a F what that poet intended. That poet's not going to come tap you on the shoulder and say, actually, that's not what I meant. I meant this. I don't care what they thought. The poem means whatever you think it means. Like, but you know, death of the author and all that. I'm a big believer in it.
And like asking what a sculpture means. You know, I think it's so interesting as a form of an art form. Poetry is so interesting because it's in this utilitarian thing called language that we're so used to ordering at a pub or doing whatever else with, that we think it should always be like clear and like you know, made into a utility. Whereas as soon as like an art form is made of clay or is made of whatever else, then everyone's like, well, they're not asking what it means necessarily. Oh, I'm appreciating it. I'm just there in the experience of this thing. So I don't know. Yeah, sorry. I feel really passionate about that.
I agree. And I think, you know, there's the establishment has a lot to answer for in that regard. There's obviously the way that we are taught to look at poetry from a young age. We're taught to underline the assonance, to do this and that and the third. And if you go to galleries, there's always something underneath each painting basically telling you, I mean, it might just give you a bit of historical context, but a lot of the times it's telling you what to think. It's telling you what the themes are. It's giving you a notion of what you should be getting from this painting or this piece of art. And God, that's one of the first things that I try and break apart when I'm in a room full of kids. I'm like, I don't give a fuck. I don't care what the poet intended. I don't care. It doesn't matter actually at this point. Like, what do you see? What do you feel? What does it remind you of? Like getting young people to have a sense of agency and what they bring, that it's not about getting something out of the poem, it's about what they bring into it, what their subjectivity brings to the experience of reading that poem. Once you unlock that, I feel like that's when we're cooking.
And I like the idea of poems being like climbing frames, not cages. Like there's, you know, it's making a space to move around on and create the space. Like Caroline Bird was talking about this on a radio show, that the one I mentioned, Handbook for Dreaming Women, and she said, you know, you don't have to explain all the images in your poem. Like, no, there isn't the artist there going, you know, which frustrates me in art galleries. I love ekphrastic writing. You know, I love going and writing about artwork. And I think it can be a good way of breaking down both at once. Thinking about it now, it's really good to go in and say, like, well, you don't read that stuff. Don't read it. Let's write. Let's write as that figure. Let's let's be creative.
Yeah. So, Caleb, I almost have the inverse of that question for you, in the sense that, you know, earlier today when we were at the Old Vic, Vanessa was talking about how we were all like completely besotted with you after your interview, and we're like, oh my God. But one of the things that we all talked about was the poems that you submitted with your application. They were incredible, and they were so intellectual and aesthetically considered and beautiful without being this kind of like hoity-toity, nobody who doesn't have a PhD can understand it. But there was like a real kind of sense of aestheticism and intellectualism and care with the words on the page. So my question for you is how you balance that with your civic work, because you're a workshop leader, you've been a teacher, you do poetry for well-being, you do eco poetry. So how you navigate, I suppose, that other side of things.
I suppose, I mean, there's different facets to that in terms of making work that works on the page and is, which you're saying as well, Vanessa, it's got to work for both. And I really love working on the page. I'm really quite obsessed with the way that language goes on the page, and I really like experimental practice and things like that as well. So I kind of, like surrealism and Oulipo and all of this stuff. I really enjoy all of that, but it's also got to be available for everyone. And I think everyone can access all of those things. Like, I think this kind of idea that you need a PhD, including in experimental work. I don't think experimentalism has to be something that's like just for the, people with PhDs or kind of the literati. I think a lot of experimental practices are incredibly liberating. So I think, if you go into like found poetry, blackout poetry, cut-ups, setting up systems, all of this stuff is great to work. And I think everyone has intelligence and wisdom. So it's about pitching it right, that you're connecting to an audience through something you've made. So that it can do both and balance both, and that's what I'm excited about doing with these poems, really. I genuinely, and when I'm running sessions, I have to, and I genuinely do believe that everyone's got interesting stuff to say, and you can give them containers, as we were saying, climbing frames, ways of kind of working to say the interesting stuff they've got. So for me, I think, have we lost Vanessa?
Yeah, it's Vanessa.
Yeah, can you hear me still?
Yeah, but your video's gone. Did you?
I don't know why. I don't know. I don't. Hold on.
If you Space Invader,
I'm back.
Then,
sorry, I don't know what happened there. Carry on.
Space Invader there, but...
a space invader. Well, anyway,
this is surreal.
Yeah, we'll carry on.
So, yeah, I mean, and I see all of those practices as part of the same thing in terms of group practice, my writing practice, and how it all kind of fits together. Because a lot of those tools that I develop as a writer and an artist for myself, I then love going and taking to a group, trying out together and seeing, what we can do with that. So, and I think I did drama in English and kind of for a long time separated the two. And for me, it's been kind of bringing back together the poems and the way I perform them. And realizing that how many skills I learned from drama that I'd sort of forgotten a bit about because I didn't think they related to poetry, like, for a while, which I think I was like, do you know what I mean? I think that was kind of like, I absorbed that from somewhere and then was like, no, this is nonsense. So, interesting. Yeah.
So one of the things that we were talking about earlier at the event at the Old Vic today was this kind of balancing act with the Bristol City Poet role, because it is a literary role, and that's something that has been at the forefront, right, of who the city poet is. But it is a civic role. It's the mayor's office, right? You are representing the city, but you're also speaking for the city, but you're also trying to kind of like give a voice to the city. Mm-hmm. So I was just wondering, if maybe each of you could sort of talk about how you view the kind of complexity and balancing of those things.
I think there's a very delicate balancing act to strike between reverence and respect for this role. Like, I think it's one thing to be one of those spunky artists, like, I don't care about the audience or, what their expectations are, what they want of me. I do what I want. I say what I want. I make what I want. I've never been that artist, like, as city poet or otherwise. Like, I think it's really disingenuous to talk about not caring what people. It's like, if you didn't care what people think, why do you even make things for the assumed consumption of others? There's obviously a negotiation and a conversation going on there. I don't think you have to pander to people to also still want to be heard, to feel like you can have a reflection back of people resonating or understanding. I think there has to be a respect for the role. and the fact that, yes, you do ideally want to be speaking to people. You want people to feel moved. You want people to feel like their perspectives or the things that they care about are being spoken about. But I think you can go mad when you take that to an extreme whereby your voice and your instincts are crippled by the fear that, oh, but have I spoken to this thing, or have I made sure to cover this aspect? And, you know, as we said earlier today at the Old Vic, you can't do everything. No one writer or artist can speak to all perspectives and all issues. And the whole point of being the city poet is that you are going to bring your particular slant and the issues that are especially pertinent to you. And that's one of the things I really loved about Caleb's interview and why we picked him, is that I feel like the issues that he is exploring in his work off his own back are some of the most pertinent issues of our day. You know, the ecology, LGBTQ rights and narratives. And I think it's really important to hold true to that, and know that there might be some people for whom that doesn't resonate, and that's fine. But also that you are still trying to speak to a very broad church of people, and having respect for that, and knowing that there are going to be compromises. I don't think this is a role where you get to be this completely creatively wacky and explorative like poet. I mean, Caleb, you might disagree, and that's absolutely fine, but I didn't feel like this was the role where I could write a deconstructed sestina in Morse code. Do you know what I mean? Like, if I get a residency from some fancy university and they are going to give me money to go and do some really esoteric geeky stuff like that, that's one thing. But I know that, you know, writing poetry that's supposed to be, in theory, something that your average person can listen to and go, oh, I got some of that. You know, they may not love it, but they can at least have something to hold on to. You can't be disappearing up your own ass too much. And I think if you're someone for whom that is too much of a compromise, then maybe this role isn't for you, is what I'd say. Like, it's not for everyone. There are some people that are very much who they are as an artist. They make what they make and they don't want to compromise for anyone, and they shouldn't have to. But then I would argue, you know, you shouldn't really be asking institutions to bend towards your will, because they also have their agendas, they have their needs, they have their criteria. So you've got to make a choice in that regard. And I'm happy to work within institutions and with organizations to reach more people, and make certain, not sacrifices, but, like, move around the inevitable constraints of the requirements and hopefully still have integrity as an artist. And that's difficult, but, such is life. So that would be my response to that. Caleb, what do you think?
Well, I mean, we like constraints, don't we, as poets? I think it's really interesting to think, how do I adapt my voice? How do I find a way into... I love finding a way into a theme. If someone comes and says, write a poem about the bins or, whatever. I'm actually going to do some of that. The recycling centre, anyway. But I love that. I just think that you could... like the poem I read earlier, like, I think poems are everywhere if we kind of allow and invite them. And then what you do with that, thinking about an audience and thinking about, how does it sit both as an object on a page and as a spoken object, to actually reach people and contact them, maybe with and I think some experimental tinges, but it's as a poet and as an artist and practitioner, it's about knowing which things am I going to bring to this and which work for it. And that takes a long time to suss out. I've been sussing it out, I feel like, my whole life, and I'm still doing it. And poetry is wonderful because you'll never figure it out. It's great fun, because you just keep going and keep, I found a new thing out. But for me, it's like thinking, what tools have I got and what will work for this? And I do hope I can write things that people will enjoy. I want to make a space, and for there to be a playful quality that means that I can do a few things at once. And that's a great challenge, I think.
And so then, Caleb, what do you think poetry can do for the average Bristolian? I mean, whatever the average Bristolian is.
Here they are. I think sometimes poems can create a space and to kind of, we talked, we mentioned this kind of utilitarian quality of language. So often language is just used to order your meal, or to like write a report or whatever it would be. And so to reclaim language as this beautiful, incredible human thing that we have and just take for granted so often, I think. And when you're a poet and you're just talking to people and they say something, and I do this a lot in workshops, and you go, oh, that thing you just said, or when a young person's saying, I don't know what to write, and then they just talk to you and you repeat back what they've said and go, did you just hear that? So I feel like this kind of reclaiming of language is a really incredible thing that we have and share. Mostly, of course, there's more stuff there that's interesting to explore. I create a pause in someone's day where you stop and re-engage with language differently. That's quite important at the moment, especially. And play, re-engage people with play is such a big one for me. Invite them to kind of be playful. That doesn't mean flippant, and it doesn't mean silly. It's a different thing. To be playful. So for me, those are really important aspects of it.
Yeah. What about you, Vanessa?
Again, coming from the spoken word community and how that's been a haven for a lot of people who felt marginalized, unheard, like their stories were peripheral or sometimes invisible. I'm always going to have a real belief in art as the place where you seek a reflection of yourself, or can be a reflection for people like you. And people can say what they like about that. And, we're having a little bit of a dig at the moment with this perhaps over-identification with that type of politic of, well, I'm Black, or, I'm woman, or I'm queer, or I'm this, or I'm that. And, there's a lot to be said about that without going too much into it. But I will always hold a very dear place in my heart for the fact that poetry was the place where, and when I say poetry, I mean spoken word and slam specifically, where not only did stories like mine exist, they were celebrated. It seemed to be the place where stories like mine thrived. And I'm always going to feel like poetry has such a powerful ability to make people feel human again. There's this adage about the thing that makes someone monstrous is the feeling that they don't have a reflection. So like a vampire that looks in a mirror and doesn't see themselves, right? So I think that is one of the biggest aspects that I have lived through and really hold testament to. But also I really agree with Caleb about play. And I think there's so many ways in which we've commodified that. People pay 200, 300 quid to go to a festival to give themselves permission to play. It's like, okay, I'm in a field in the middle of nowhere. I've paid all this money. I've got my shiny leggings on. Now I give myself permission to be playful, to be silly, to access this side of myself where I enjoy things for their own sake. And I feel like poetry is an opportunity to do that with language. Yeah, as you say, it's not about language to manipulate, or language to make a specific point, or language to serve the means of, capitalism, or, whatever else it might be. I mean, certainly when you're writing poetry as a living, I suppose you're still part of that system. But it's a really wonderful and nebulous arena in which words are doing all sorts for all kinds of reasons. And those reasons aren't to be defined. And that's part of the joy. And I think that's the problem when people access with poetry. They come with the very understandable metric of, everything has its purpose, everything has its point, whether it be the grade I'm going to get at the end, or the salary you're going to give me at the end, or the approval you're going to give me at the end. So when you put a poem in front of a kid, of course they want to know, tell me the thing to say about the poem that gives me the grade, or tell me the thing about the poem that you're going to say, yes, that's correct. And then you're going to think I'm smart. Whereas the beauty of poetry, when you really get into it, is it's like, like this is actually just about messing around. This is about constantly going through the side door, the cat flap. Like this isn't about the correct thing. This is about how many things can we get out of one line or one stanza. And yeah, I love that. I feel like if we can access that more and apply it to other aspects of our lives and our problems that we need to solve in our society, we'd be doing really well.
And there's a lot of evidence that it's good for us to play, like Dr. Stuart Brown, who's amazing on this, like people who don't play or and have completely stopped it in their lives become unhealthy, unwell. It's genuinely, it's very core, I think, to humanity, and we lose it a lot.
Agreed.
And I guess there's also, like that bigger issue that you're touching on, Vanessa, which is like these days, I think particularly for younger people, there's a real fear of failure. Because, I mean, there's so many really good reasons why. Like the economy's terrible, everything seems so frightening, there's so many high stakes, everything's testing and metrics driven. But poetry is a place where failure is actually really beautiful sometimes.
Yeah. And I mean, we have to also acknowledge that there are a load of people that would give you a whole ream of rules for what makes a poem good or successful or worthy or publishable or whatever. So, the poetry world is like any other world. There are a bunch of gatekeepers. There are a bunch of people that want to demarcate who are the good poets and who aren't. But at its core, I agree with you, Madhu. Like poetry is the lawless land. It's like the punk land, and I think it's precisely because it's such a neat. It's like the runt of the litter in the literary world. Do you know what I mean? Everyone's like poems. Like probably the only thing that's like underneath us is like, I don't know, like.
Is that
experimental theater?
Yeah, right. Like literally, what is lower than poetry? Nothing. So in a way,
poetry's so cheap to do, isn't it? It's like pen and paper. Like it's
right.
It's so cheap and accessible and radical in that respect.
Right.
It's
you
great.
Don't need lots of fancy camera equipment. You don't need this or that. Yeah, absolutely. But I think once you actually engage with poetry and get past what can feel like a lot of gatekeeping, it's like, oh my God, this place is lawless. This place is crazy. Like look at the way they're flinging words around. Look at the order they just put that in or whatever. And that's when the fun begins.
So we're actually really close to being out of time. And I know that Caleb is going to read for us. But before we do that, I had to ask you one last question, Vanessa, which is, what's your favorite thing that happened to you while you were city poet or as city poet?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So I gave a different anecdote at the Old Vic earlier today, but I just remembered another one as I was having my lunch. A gentleman came to Bedminster Library on one of my residencies, and he was talking about how he used to be a theatre practitioner, made his own work, very much a creative person who was writing constantly. And then he had a brain injury, and he had to relearn how to talk, how to write, how to read. And he got tired often and had he felt like he had a memory of the person he used to be that haunted him, but he had to accept the fact that the way he thought had fundamentally changed, and thus the person he was had changed. And he described thinking as like fingers that would normally connect like this, being like this. And this ability to create connections between words was a lot harder. And he was exploring poetry as a way to try and reacquaint himself with language and how to use it. And we had a really moving conversation about what that was like, and the fact that his reading age was basically hinging on the same as his young child. So his child was, I think, 6 or 7, and he was reaching the point where he would be struggling with some of the books that he'd be reading with his child. And, we were talking about how there's something so profound about being able to see what it's like for his child accessing language for the first time and literally be on a similar journey alongside the child. And how there is a real beauty to be accessed in coming into language the way he is and what that might mean for his writing, rather than grasping at some vague memory of the writer he should be or used to be. And that was really profound for me, because it was something that I can't even conceive of. I can't imagine what it's like and how difficult and sad and frustrated he must feel. But I also found it an incredibly bountiful and profound thing that he was willing to come and speak to me about it and try and convey what language meant for him. And even just that as an image, I was like, that's poetry. It's beautiful. And the way he had to use his gestures more, because so often he couldn't find the word that he was looking for in his mind. And, I told him that to me was a wonderful thing that he should explore and should consider part of his journey of poetry and writing. And, it was like a workout for me to think about how to navigate that with him and to be mindful and compassionate, but also to say, I don't want to condescend to you. Like there's some rigor in this. There's something exciting and thrilling and genre bending. And, you know, it was one of those conversations where you're paddling to keep on top because, you know, I hadn't experienced anything quite like that before, but it was so moving and such a testament to what language can be and the very real holistic and palliative role it can play for someone. And that was another really wonderful conversation I had in a library.
That's really, really actually quite moving, Vanessa. You know, we are unfortunately out of time. We could probably talk for ages more, but before we officially close, I'd like to invite you, Caleb, to share with us your first City Poet poem.
Thank you. Yeah, and I really like that instance has a quality of the poetic, as in this poetics idea is all around us. And I guess I wrote something where I was thinking about people as poems and this poem as a party, because a lot of parties have been cancelled this year with very good reason. Of course, don't go to parties. And this poem was to kind of stand in for those. And I was reminded of Vanessa's club sequence of poems, because there's been no nightclubs, there's been too little dancing. So I guess that's part of this. And for me, it's a celebration of poetry as collaborative, collective, shared, something that we bounce around and all do together. So there's people who've chipped into this from Twitter and given ideas, and my friends who are critiquers as well. So, you know, poetry is so collaborative. This is a party that is also a poem. Party Poem 2020. Welcome to this poem, which is all the cancelled parties. You don't need an invitation other than that title, Party Poem. But feel free to imagine one in twirly cursive writing on fancy perfumed paper, or ping, arriving as a text, or, if you're that way inclined, which I am, an official calendar event, survey attached. You've RSVP'd with your eyes and or ears, so let's head inside, away from this corridor where you've hung up your ideas about poems. Thankfully, because this whole party is full of poems and the police are coming to shut it down. No, sorry, I don't know. This whole party is full of poems. Poems stood around the buffet, removing cling film from shining trays of lingo, pondering which delicious verbs to nibble. Laughing, I'm going to start that line again. Pondering which delicious verbs to nibble, plunging a ladle into a lustrous crystal punch bowl full of a drink. A drink, perhaps, you'll each be able to describe in HD 3D smell-o-vision as exactly the one you desired. You go to find the host. Whose party is this, anyway? The music shuffles days, decades, centuries, sonata to reggae, gamelan to techno, mid-track, as though the DJ is wired into everyone's heads. Then some new style of music nobody's ever heard, but sways to, in tones that poetry noise. I meant to say in the introduction, the poetry noise is something that happens at poetry readings, particularly for like page poets. This so there it is. Room after room full of poems, each a party, each a world. Some opening lines seem nice enough. Then this poem which introduces you to all their friends. You'll keep in touch. Maybe there's a poem you'll make official, live with, framed on your wall. On the stairs, poems touchscreen scroll, upload themselves on a digital fizz of hearts. As you pass, this other huddle of zip-lipped, collar-starched poems hiss. Those other poems aren't even poems. But you smile politely, move on to find the bathroom. Knock. Wait. Inside, some poems overdone it. Said the wrong thing again to that other poem they love. A second-hand smorgasbord of words, words, words everywhere. Their hair is full of exclamation marks, held back by a friendly editor. Let's get you tidied up in a taxi, yeah? Washing, re-washing your hands. Your mind is a dance floor of potential. Your eyes a glitter of question marks. You are a poem in the mirror. As you set out from this party poem, this rainbow of houses, this high-rise, this woodland, this high-rise rainbow woodland house, you'll glide through rolling streets where poems flit between phone lines. Poems claw through side alley bins. And this poem ferries you home now, its engine warm and humming. Thank you.
Yay!
Oh, maybe yours was the police, Madhu. Sorry, I had to reference that when it happened. I was like, "There's the police! They're coming! There's no more party poem." Madhu, if you, Madhu's no longer able to speak,
Madhu is muted.
Are we just going to
Madhu, come back to us.
Madhu, you could do a charade to
She just said
down.
I seem to be muted, and she's literally like, peace out, A-Town down. Okay, so I guess I will wrap it up.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, we have been here ushering in Caleb Parkin to his post as Bristol City Poet. And yeah, thank you so much for listening. And yeah, please do. I don't know where people can get a copy of the little collection of the poems I wrote over the 2 years. Go on the Bristol Festival Ideas website. You'll be able to find out more on there. It's a lovely little pamphlet. And yeah, thank you so much again. And take care, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Wear masks and wash your hands and all that stuff. Bye.
Don't go to parties.
Don't go to parties.
Yeah.
Apart from poem parties.
Poems. They're okay.
Party poems. Yeah.
It was a socially distancing. It's a civic poem in that respect.
Yes.
Okay.